welcome to all of you for our webinar on talking about the implications of COVID for church musicians. I'm very glad to have you here. I think we have almost 200 people online, and we're very, very pleased about that. I'm hoping to share with you today two things. One is to give you a brief overview of the research findings that affect church musicians. And then the second part of the program will be sharing with you what I've heard and seen and people have talked about, some solutions to what may be possible once we return to whatever normal is going to be. I want to give some caveats, though. First of all, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a medical professional. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a researcher that has done the research. But what I've done is tried to follow what's going on in the research, and really depending a lot on what we're hearing from public health officials, and also the work that's coming out of the professional music organizations, the national organizations for choral directors, for teachers of music, all of their big national groups, because they've been doing great things about compiling important information and sharing things. So that's what my presentation will be drawing on. When we're all finished at the end, you'll be able to ask questions, and you'll be able to put those questions in your Q&A box that's at the bottom of your screen. So I'm going to begin and talk with you about the research aspect of it. So George, if we could have the first slide and then right into the second, we'll be set to go. Okay, so I'd like to start with a few more starting points. The reason the National Forum Leadership Group decided this was something we ought to do is because we know that there are going to be a lot of decisions going forward. Right now, all of us are feeling pretty bad because for the most part, unless you're the head chanter in the church or the head chanter plus one other person, we've been excluded, and it's been hard on all of us. Now as the parishes are opening, there still isn't a lot of decision making about what to do about larger groups of singers, but the time is here and the time is coming, and I feel it's very important for those of you in your home parishes to sit down with your priest, even with your parish council president, because the singers and those two people, priest and parish council presidents, are really the important decision-making team to answer the question, what are we going to do about our church musicians? So the information about why we're having to do things this way, even to your other choir members, and what the research is leading us to is going to be very important. And I'm pretty optimistic because what I see is, as daunting and bleak as the research seems to be, it's also, though, showing us pathways for how we can make some adjustments and we can transition back into church. And that's sort of the framework I'm going to use. The other starting point I want to say is no one size is going to fit everybody. These are all going to have to be individual decisions that you make based on the research, what that's telling us, based on some good ideas we've heard from others who have tried things out, and then make the best, safest decision for your own parish. And right away, we already have some constraints, because right away each of you will have guidance from your civic authorities, you know, your governor, your mayor, your county executive, they're going to set some ground rules. You know, churches can be at 25% or 50%, and that will vary depending on where in this country you live. So that's one thing that's going to be a given. The second given, of course, is what your metropolitan says. And although the metropolitans are fairly consistent in what they're advising to the parishes, we haven't heard a lot yet from them about church musicians, other than there should be one chanter, and if there's two, the second one should sit on the other side. And some have actually said there will be no choirs, at least in the phase that we're in. So each of you will have to know what your metropolitan is saying, and that will be a framework for what you do. Beyond that, then your conversations among yourselves, among the church musicians in your parish, your local priest, and your parish council are going to be the things that dictate what decisions you make. So that's sort of the beginning starting point. And then I get to today's purpose. And I think I've alluded to it. It's that what we would like to do is provide you with a framework so that when it's time for chanters, choirs, and congregations to safely return to singing in their parishes, you'll have the information in order to make the best decisions for your particular situation. Okay, so that's where we're headed in today's presentation. So let's take a look now at the current status. And this is the current status about the research. So let's take a look at that. We'll look at the next slide. One of the, when we first heard of all of this, I think we all took it to heart. We were all sort of aghast, not realizing the impact COVID was going to have on church choirs and chanters and chanter choirs. And as I began to look at things, I thought, my goodness, we're not alone in this. All the churches are feeling, their singers are feeling the same way that we are. Singers who are in synagogues, singers in other temples, singers in Protestant churches, singers in Baptist, all kinds. And then further, even beyond the churches, the community choruses, your philharmonic people, your philharmonic orchestras, your bands are all in the same boat as we are. And then you get into the schools, and the school music teachers are wondering, what are we going to do with music classes? What are we going to do with chorus and band and things like that? So it's widespread. So we're not alone in this. And the good part of that is now I think that people have just finally come to accept that we are a dangerous species as far as the virus is concerned. And people have accepted that rather than fighting against it. And so now we're getting a lot more creative solutions as to, well, what can we do as we start to come back and to do that safely. So that's the good news out of this type of situation that we're in. A little bit more on the next slide about the current status. There have been major studies of looking at aerosol studies related to the performing arts, and that's been conducted by the University of Colorado and the University of Maryland. Those are the major studies where a whole consortium of people and all of the professional music organizations have been involved in this. There have been other individual studies as well. I have tended to depend more on the major ones because they're all peer reviewed and they're pretty consistent. Every so often an individual will publish a study, or there'll be a news article of another study. This person says that masks are not any good. But those aren't being verified and validated by the other people. Even the professional organizations are not accepting those. So what I'm going to share is pretty much what's coming from the big groups connected with major universities and with the major professional organizations. And I've listed them there. Down at the bottom, and there's a whole bunch of others that are collaborating together to gather the research and then to help decide what to do. Okay, so I asked myself the question, why are we focused on research? Why are choir people and chanters and priests and parishes wanting to think about research? Let's just figure this out. Well, as I said, I think I said earlier, they're giving us some guideposts so that we see the way forward and we can make decisions. And I think those are very important. And you'll see as I go along, you almost, once you hear the research finding, you say, oh, okay, maybe that helps you a little bit more easily come up with what are you going to do in your parish. So that's pretty much the basis. The major finding, what I call the central problem, is this. And it's the next slide. And the question is, the statement is, aerosols from singing travel much farther than was originally thought. Okay? And when people studied aerosols, they knew that, first they knew that as you spoke, droplets are falling pretty much to the ground that contain a bulk of the viruses, just from speaking, the droplets of wet air. And then they saw that there were others discovered that there were these things called aerosols that were teensy tiny little droplets of air that carried fewer viruses. And they thought that they went about 6 feet. And that's why now we hear from all the public health people, stand 6 feet away, keep 6 feet away. But as the research went on and people began to research singing, and especially groups of people singing, they saw that the aerosols were traveling further. And out of that have come a lot of areas of interest, and you'll see that on your screen. Volume, the distance issues, time issues. These are the 6 things that I'm going to go through. So let's take the first one. Let's do volume. And the basic finding there is the louder the sound, the more aerosols are expelled and the further they travel. And again, as I said, normal talking, just if I were here talking with you in person, my aerosols are only going about 6 feet, so it's safe. But what they have found is that singing is in the same category as trumpets and brass and loud crowds. Because if you're breathing correctly and you're singing out, and then there's a lot of people singing, those aerosols are going further. So what this tells us is that singers have to be more careful about dealing with this aerosol issue. And it's 2 ways. First of all, they have to be careful of the people around them and to protect those people from getting infected. And then you also have a large congregation and altar boys or priests or other people who are serving on the solea, and you have to protect all of those people too. So that's the finding about volume. All right, then we move on to looking at distance. And again, the newer studies are showing that these aerosols are dispersing much further. Now, in the beginning, again, it was 5 or 6 feet. Now, the research that are studying singers, and especially groups of singers, they're suggesting that it's 8 to 12 feet for singers, and a few studies are even saying those aerosols are going more than 20 feet. Although the further out it gets, there's less virus on those there's less aerosols and therefore less. Another aspect of this distancing has to do with masks, and most of the studies and the CDC and the public health people are saying that masks do decrease the spread of aerosol. They help. They don't get rid of it completely, but they help. And the newer studies, just most recently, are now beginning to show that it's not just others that you're protecting, but there also is some protection to yourself. So now there's a dual reason for wearing the masks. Now, the implications for us is, depending on where you are in the church, that distancing, how you're going to distance yourself when we're allowed to return to church, is going to be a big consideration. And thinking about where the choir is. Are you a Byzantine chant choir up near the altar? Are you singing in the pews as a choir? Is the choir in the choir loft? Those are another whole area of consideration. And it's probably, for many parishes, going to require changes, doing things differently. And you know that then you have to deal with the personal discomfort of the choir members who like singing in the choir loft and they don't want to go downstairs, or vice versa. There's, if you're a choir that uses an organ, what are you going to do if you have to change and you can't move the organ? Those are the areas of decision making that you're going to have to go to. And we'll talk about that in the second part of the program. Okay, next area was time, the time you spend together. This one is an interesting one for us, I think. Whoops, I'm sorry. I'm ahead of myself. It's room size. That's all right, George. You can go back to room size. Thank you. Um, the findings are the larger the room, the better, is safer. And so therefore, again, people who have larger churches or larger choir lofts or a larger solea, or the pews, the way the pews are arranged, are going to have an easier decision, a solving solution in this area. Rehearsal rooms are going to be more of a problem. Think about your rehearsal room. They're usually small, sometimes one little window, maybe some air conditioning, maybe not. Those are very problematic. And so thinking not only about what is it going to be when you're singing in church, but what are you going to do about rehearsals? The good news part of this, especially for those of you in warmer climates, is um, the more airflow you have, this is what the research is showing, the more airflow that there is in an area, it lessens the problem of spacing. And of course, outdoors is safer than indoors because the air is moving around. And some people are deciding to have rehearsals outdoors. Some of the professional groups are doing that, still distancing, but practicing outdoors. You have to look at ventilation, you have to look at airflow, filtering. Does your rehearsal room have open windows? Is there good circulation in the sanctuary, so that you can bring a group of people together safely? So the room size and airflow is another decision point. Okay, then we'll go to time. And this is the one that I thought is especially interesting for us. The longer you're with a group or a person, the higher your risk is. And if you think about your everyday travels, if you're in the grocery store and you pass by somebody, and if that person even coughs and improperly, doesn't cover their cough, and you walk by, you're still, if you're just passing that person by in a matter of seconds, you're still in a very low risk category of catching it. Safety is considered to spend no more than 15 minutes with a person or a group. Maximum safety is 15 minutes and over. And what the research about choral singing is at the bottom. Very definitely, choirs and groups should not sing for more than 30 minutes at a time. So of course that's very problematic for us when we have services of an hour, hour and 15 minutes, an hour and a half of singing. So this is a big one. We have to sort of figure out some creative things to do. Okay, the last one, mental health. I'm sorry, health and sanitation. This is probably familiar to you because this comes mostly from the public health people. You have to look at vulnerable people. And again, there are variations. The general guideline is that people with 65 should not gather in groups and do any of these things. But some 70-year-olds, 75-year-olds who are in perfect health have no other conditions, no heart problems, no asthma problems, no COPD. They might want to take a risk and sing. But here's somebody with 40 years old of age that has some sort of immune system problem, should probably, they're in a high risk just because of those vulnerable conditions. And then of course, if anybody does have the flu or have any of the COVID systems, they just should not participate. Again, the public health people are saying, wash your hands a lot, use sanitizers, make sure you cough by blocking your cough, are all things that apply to singers. The original, way back in the beginning of the quarantines, everybody, was concerned about the virus on different surfaces, and you had instructions about leave your grocery bags in the garage and buy those Lysol wipes and clean the counters and everything you touch, clean all the doorknobs and all that. As people have studied the virus more, that seems to be less priority. The findings are mixed. They do know that there's differences in the virus life on wood versus stainless steel versus formica, but it's really not the major way that this virus is um, being transmitted. It's really the aerosols and the breathing. The one thing though about hard surfaces is that music and books are still something that we have to think about, and that wherever you sing or wherever you rehearse, the sanitation of that physical environment has to be sanitized before and after you leave, and that's still being recommended. So that's the findings on health and sanitation. And then the last one on mental health. This is a new area of research that's coming to the fore, and more people are considering this as an important consideration. They know, researchers know, and these aren't only health people, these are psychologists and social worker type researchers. When people are isolated for a long time, when they're separated, when they're fearful, that depressions and anxiety seem to increase. And also an interesting finding is that if you're separated from your group, then the cohesion of that group is going to suffer. If a choir, for instance, is separated for a year and a half, how many people are going to come back? That's and the finding is that the group cohesion does suffer when people are separated too much. And then this idea of separation and loneliness can then actually lead to mental health problems. So this is a whole new area for us to consider for everyone, but I think the group singing is something that solving the problems there is we have to think about the mental health. So what I've done is I put it all together for you in just two ways to help you kind of grapple with all of this stuff, because it can be formidable, but there is a way through. But I will say we're never going to be at absolute safety. What we have to decide is what's the safer risk and what things are too high of a risk. And all of these things that I've talked to you about, volume, time, distance, all have a safer risk solution and they also have greater risks. So you're going to have to juggle this matrix, because some things might be very safe, but on another one you have to make a decision that's a little riskier. But for safer risks, in a nutshell way of saying it is, the fewer the people singing with masks and distancing in larger, more open spaces and for shorter periods of time. On the other hand, the greater risks are the larger your group, even with masks and distancing, in smaller and more closed up spaces for longer than 30 minutes is high risk. So that sort of summarizes everything that we know about the research related to church musicians. Okay, so now we'll move to what can we do about this, and we can do something about this. And as I said in my introduction, we're starting to get ideas, very creative ideas. The new possibilities are working up. There are some decisions that we can make to allow us to come back to singing when we get the okay to do that. So let's take a look at some of them. Let's take a look at distancing. Okay. As I said earlier, larger churches are going to have many more options in this. But I would say that what I've heard of choirs doing, and some suggestions, these are from other parishes, non-Orthodox parishes, is looking for new places to stand. You may be able to work with your parish council to reserve a section of pews so that you can distance and block off those pews and sing from that area. The larger choir lofts may find that they have room for 5 or 6 or 7, maybe even 8 people, and still have the correct spacing. There may be, because you're spaced, there may be that you'll have to use microphones to do this. So the distancing again is going to be affected by your particular building. All right. Rehearsals, though, is the really difficult one. You really have to look at that room to make sure there's enough ventilation and it's big enough. I think many choirs are going to have to consider using an alternate room like your gymnasium or your public gathering space. Then that means, what are we going to do about stands? What are we going to use to accompany the choir? Our piano is up in the little choir room. You may have to get a keyboard and come in and use that. And then you have to think of room sanitation. So again, whoever the parish is using for cleaning services will have to know that before the choir rehearses and after, that not only the room will have to be sanitized, but are people using the restrooms? What doors are they using? What doorknobs are they touching? All those will have to be accommodated through the sanitation crew. The stands, if you bring the stands down to your new room, they should have a name label on, and they will have to be sanitized and kept in that room. You can't keep putting them back into the other room. So there's a lot of logistics here, just having to deal with rehearsals. Okay, and let's move on to placement. The recommended that's coming from our Metropolitan is they for the most part are saying up to 2 chanters, but they should be separated, one on either side of the solea. There are still, if you on Sunday mornings you look at some churches, there are still 2 chanters standing right next to each other, sometimes 3 for special occasions, sometimes 4. That's really high risk behavior. The chanters should be masked, and I don't know that they really are doing that. It's not a high risk that they're unmasked, but they really should be if you're taking the masking findings in place. You have to look, chanters, of which way you're facing. You don't want to be facing the congregation, and you don't want to be facing the clergy. So you're going to I think, face forward, and maybe most of you already do, face forward looking across the iconostasio to the chanter that would be on the other side of you, would probably be the safest way for chanters. As far as choirs are concerned, 8 to 12 feet if possible, but that just may not be possible in your particular parish. Again, you have to position yourself at angles if you're sitting downstairs. If you're up in the choir loft, the angles you have to consider is if you stand, for instance, in a U shape, you can't do that because you're sending viruses across to the basses and tenors if you're doing that. So you have to stand facing forward, angled, so that you're not spreading too much aerosol to your fellow choir members. Most important, the director cannot stand in the middle because then you're getting aerosols from 8, 10, 12, 20 people. Worst possible place to be. So the choir is going to have to get used to looking at the director who might be standing on the side now, and that's an adjustment the choir will have to make, and you'll have to deal with that during rehearsals because it is different. Or perhaps the director is standing in the back, like the middle, and then people have to sort of look sideways, but you'll have to work that out. And of course, the spacing of your choir loft is going to affect that, but that's what you're going to have to deal with. Okay, let's go on and look at group size. Chanters, I already talked about. But I would add one thing. For parishes who are privileged enough to have 3, 4, 5, 6 chanters or a chanter choir, some churches have just chosen to have one chanter do everything, and they've carried a yeoman's task through this whole thing of doing every single service all by themselves, every single sacrament. And then there are parishes that have 2. What I would suggest, because again, remembering what I said about morale and group cohesion and mental health, that if you have more than 2 chanters, consider setting up a rotation system so everybody gets a chance, at least once a month or once every 6 weeks. You could have 2 people on that other side if the bishops are allowing it. They should stand 6 feet apart, but if one chanter doesn't feel comfortable carrying the service all by himself or herself, there could be a second one there. I think you could work that out and still be relatively safe. But I would suggest setting up that rotation calendar. I have heard of one church where the second person once a month is a choir member. And that's another way to, in the beginning, get the choir back, is to have one of the chanters be a choir member. Choirs, I think the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to be singing in duets or trios or quartets. And I think that might be a good, slow way of beginning to transition back. And here's where the director is going to decide, well, who's that trio? Who's that quartet? Can they carry the parts? Or maybe I just do everything in unison for a while. Or maybe we just do 2 parts. Those are decisions the director will make looking at the capabilities of the various people in the choir. But I think you'll go back quicker if you think about doing the small groups. Some choirs that have people who really know the music, and their larger choirs, I mean, they're cutting it like into half or into thirds, and they take turns. Group A is week 1 of the month, group B is 2, etc. And they've got a regular rotation schedule. I don't know that any Orthodox choir that I know is at that point yet, but some of the religious choirs are I mean, the non-Orthodox parishes, Protestant parishes and Catholic parishes are doing it that way. So they've set up that same rotation, and they've assigned people to a group, and that's how they're singing. Congregations, I don't think anybody is thinking much about congregations. If you have a congregation that really sings, I don't know how many of our people are congregations that are like that in our churches, but there are some. That's very dangerous. And I said yesterday or Wednesday when I gave this presentation at the Clergy-Laity Congress, saying to the priests, you really have to ask your congregation to sub-sing or to sing very softly. And they're masked, of course, because a whole congregation singing loudly is just putting all sorts of viruses in the air, and it's just too large at this point. So those are some of the suggestions for group size. Now, the use of masks is the next area. What our problem is singers is that we need extra space in front of the mask. Because if you've ever tried to sing with a mask, they get wet pretty quickly, and sometimes even they're starting to interfere with your lip movements because they're too tight across, and they're hot. And when you're singing, it even gets harder. So what kind of a mask you use is important, because everybody really should have a mask on. Now, an interesting study was done by some university people just recently in the past couple of months, and they evaluated all kinds of masks. And of course, the results came out that the N95 masks that the medical people use are not totally effective, but the most effective of all of them. The worst effective are those gaiter masks. I think I spelled it wrong too. I just saw it the other night. It's Gaiter, I think, whatever that means. But it's those that look like a turtleneck that you put around your neck, and then you just pull the cover up when you need to be masked, and that's your mask. What they found is it didn't do anything because they're silky material. The aerosols went right through them, so they were totally ineffective. And so they do not recommend the use of those gaiter masks, except some people with breathing problems, that's all they can tolerate. So for medical reasons, they may have to use them. Not good, but it's better than nothing. The second worst are these bandanas, when you think about them. They're open on the bottom, so all of the aerosols are coming out from the bottom and from the sides and not doing very much. And they did not test this category, but I put this new thing a lot of choirs are thinking the panacea, and people are these plastic masks, like a sheet of plastic paper with a band here, very comfortable, nice. They're just like bandanas. All the aerosols are coming out. So those are probably the no-nos. Interestingly, the best mask is the simple, next to the N95, is the simple, you can't see it, can you? And the simple, cheap little blue hospital mask. If you can't have an N95, this is the best mask to use. These are very inexpensive, and they even have the metal, so it fits tightly across your nose. These work very well. And then any others of the close by, any others that people are making or that you can buy. Now, what's happening though, this is where some of the creativity is coming out. Knowing that we need more space to sing, if you watch people, you'll see some people wearing masks. I'm going to show them to you. I don't know if you can back down. They can, I guess you can't see it. They sort of have a little peak here. Oh, okay. I think my helpers are helping me. And so they stick out a little bit, not a lot, but they stick out a little bit. And if you watch people in the stores, you'll see now. And I just the other day, I saw a lady with them, and I thought, oh, that would be better because it gives me more space here in front. I asked her where she got these, and she said, oh, Target has them. And I walked into Target. They had hundreds of them, a 2-pack for $4. So again, these are very nice. Companies now, knowing they've got a market with singers, are starting to also give us some options for masks. And the one big one that everybody was talking about is called this resonance singer's mask. And I think Joe's going to show you a picture of it. Do you see how it's built out in the front? And so that gives you a lot of space. And if you look toward the bottom, You'll even, if George, you could move it up just a little bit, you can even see the mask on people. See how it is? There's two downsides to this one. People are sort of embarrassed to wear it because it sort of looks like a snout, a pig's snout or something like that. And second, the cost of this is about $32, $33. That's a lot to ask people to give to, some people. I mean, I'm not saying people will resist, but it is a consideration. What I suggested to the parish council people Wednesday was this may be an area where the parish council can help. If a choir decides to use this part of a mask, they might be able to take some of the choir budget or their budget and buy a mask for everybody in the choir. And that's something worth considering in talking with your parish council people. Just Wednesday, I found out, which may be even the best solution of all, Presbytera Supica from the West Coast found essentially a frame that you put on first. It's a plastic frame that fits around, and it comes all around your face, and then it has a bar here sticking out and another bar this way. And then you put your regular mask over the top of that. And she says it has saved her life as far as she chants. She's the chanter in the church. And she highly recommends it. And it's about $20. She said she just searched the web and she found it. But it is available, and that may be something that you want to consider. But just looks wise, it sounds like it solves the problem a little bit better than even the singer's mask, and it doesn't have that stigma of the choir people looking odd and being uncomfortable with that. Other people are taking the approach, they're still wearing masks, but they've gone to places like Lowe's and bought a big square of plexiglass, especially the director, and attached with tape, I think, somehow attached that piece of plexiglass onto their stand. So it's just like they have in the commercial stores, in the grocery stores. You're sort of protected there. And one choir I know actually purchased those squares for everybody in their choir. I don't think it was a big choir. It might have been 6 or 8 people, but they actually did it. And that was one way they're handling the problem. I just saw another chanter who got very creative, and he purchased plastic sheeting and then tubes, and he actually constructed around the analogion like almost like a shower curtain, all around. And the priest made a comment. I'm not sure, that might be just a little obtrusive visually, but that's how he just made this cubby around himself, and he was enclosed in this plastic sheeting. So that may be a solution you can work. But if you want to go to that the shields route, that plexiglass seal seems like a workable idea. Okay, so next, the time we spend together. Here's where I think we can be very creative. For chanters, you don't have, if you have 2 chanters, if you have 1 chanter, you're just going to have to, this is where you're going to be in high risk. You're singing more than 30 minutes. There's no other way around it. But if you have 2 chanters or more, you could negotiate some of you singing maybe the first part of the service, say up to the cherubic hymn, and then returning to the seats in the pews, and then the other chanter singing the rest of the service until the end of the service. Similarly, with choirs, I would say if you want to start easily, think about only the first few times you're in church, only singing 1, 2, or 3 hymns. You might just say to the chanter, we'll do the communion section. We'll sing that. And so you remain in your pews. And then when it's time, you go to the choir area. You can already be there because you haven't been singing. And you sing the 3 hymns, and then you go back to the pews. and do alternate it. I think there's room here for some really creative cooperation with the chanters. You know, usually what we do is the chanters do the otros, then the choir does the rest of the service, and if there's a special hymn, you let the chanters sing. You know, that's cooperation. It's not really collaboration. I think if you really sit down and switch out who sings what, you'll be able to manage this 30 minutes pretty easily. And then you might find you really like it that way once this is all over. So think about that, alternating with your chanters, coming in, at least in your beginning weeks, only singing a few hymns, maybe just singing the hymns as people receive communion, just enough that your choir members are finally back singing, the congregation is happy to hear the choir, but you're keeping safe by keeping under 30 minutes. Rehearsals, again, are difficult. No longer than 30 minutes is the recommendation, and then the professional choral associations are saying after 30 minutes you stop, everybody leaves the room, you aerate the room for 20 minutes, and if you want to go back, you go back to the room, or maybe you just go to another room and use that room, which means more sanitation cleanup, but you finish the rehearsal for another 30 minutes in another room. That's going to be a hard one to do because you might lose your choir's interest in that 20-minute of air exchange time. For congregations, I suggested to the priests that they talk to the congregation about the safety, and maybe for a while, for the time being, they say, if we want to sing, let's just sing our church hymn together, maybe sing Anita together, pick a certain small number of hymns that the congregation can sing a little bit louder, and then the rest of the time they sing very softly or they sub-sing. And I think that could be an easy way to handle it with the congregation. For congregations that don't really sing much, or one or two people just sort of sing softly in their pews every Sunday anyhow, that's very safe. There's no problem there. Okay, sanitation and health. Let's look at that. Again, you have to consider the age and health differences in your groups. I think you have to look at the personal feelings of the choir. Not everybody will be comfortable going back right away, so you may not have a full choir at the beginning to go back. And you have to respect those people who, for whatever, they could be the right age, they could have no health problems, but they still don't feel comfortable coming to large groups yet, and that you have to just let that be. So you have to assess your choir to see what the feelings are. The hand washing and guidelines, sanitizing, I have seen suggestions where you have sanitizer at the rehearsal and in church so people can use that as they wish. Music books, everybody's saying you have to have your own book, you keep your own book, you take it home, you do not store your book after rehearsal or after singing in the choir room. You take it home. If a choir director is passing out new music, sheets of new music, people should put that in their book and keep it there. It's not to be handed back to the choir director. If some choirs have two people singing on one book, can't do that. You'll have to buy another book and ask those people to stand at least 6 feet apart. Rehearsals, I think we've covered. Again, this is something you talk about with your parish council people, the kind of sanitation that is going to be needed before and after your choir rehearsals. Okay? All right, now the interesting one, I think, is attention to morale and mental health. I already talked about this, your different comfort levels that people are going to have. I would suggest that there are some ways you can help those kind of people get their feet wet to feel more comfortable being in larger groups. I know personally that happened to me, is until we took the first step you know, you had too many questions in your mind to want to venture out into a larger group. So you might want to consider some safe ways of doing that, like suggesting small groups. Let's just get together for socially distancing. You know, we'll have coffee together, but we'll stay far apart. We'll be outside. Or you might say to the choir, let's get together, bring your own chair, bring your supper and something to drink, and we'll just get together and plan an outing like that where you're able to outside, where you're able to be 8 feet apart and you can still talk with each other. You're still distanced, you're still masked. But I think that's a very helpful thing in the decision-making process every individual has to make about whether they're ready to come to church or not. Regardless, I would say this next section of the slide is maybe one of the most important things you can do, especially as choir directors. How do you keep your people connected and learning during all of this? Because, you know, we might not be back singing until, say, next Pascha or next January, if we're lucky. That just might not be happening. So you need to think about how do you keep that group together. And the easy way is just to make telephone calls. You know, it doesn't have to be the choir director only. It could be other members calling each other. It could be setting up FaceTime or Skype calls. Zoom has been a wonderful thing for us. Many choirs are meeting together under Zoom. And I think maybe Zoom is even underutilized. You know, the problem with Zoom is you can't sing because there's not enough bandwidth for everybody to sing together. But you can use Zoom for simply just for socializing, just touching base, how you doing? And generally everybody will start talking about the quarantine or the pandemic or the masks. But just getting a feel for the pulse of your choir and just socializing. But beyond that, you can have choirs listen to hymns. There are lots of videos on singing techniques that are especially made for people to listen to an instructor and then mimic it at home. Again, they can't hear the other choir members, but they can do what the instructor said. You could play on YouTube. There are recordings of church hymns. And you could play that if you were the host of the Zoom session, and then the choir members there could just sing along to it if it's their favorite Enita or Soma Christu or something like that. The other is a wonderful time to invite, like this, set up a meeting and invite somebody to make a presentation. If you have a vocal teacher in your school, invite that person to do a presentation for your choir. Invite the priest to come in and talk about, why are we having all these substitutions this Sunday? What is Sunday of the Cross? And what are all these hymns that we're doing? Or what are the 8 Apolitikia about? Why do we have to keep changing these numbers? And they go in a cycle? I didn't know they went in a cycle. All of those kind of things. Wonderful opportunity for a priest to provide some religious education to the choir. So I would strongly recommend thinking about how you can use Zoom to keep your choir learning and most especially keep them together. Now you've been looking at a slide about electronic solutions, and a lot of people are excited about this, but when you really get into it, you need a lot of technical know-how to do this. You've all seen the virtual choirs, but it means that everybody individually at home needs to learn how to record it, how to set up the microphones, how to get it right, how to convert it to an MP3 file, and then send it to the person who's going to put it together. And then for the person who puts it together, that person has to have a lot of expertise to put those virtual choirs together. And the more people you have, there's more time. It could be for a choir of 20 people, it could be 40, 50, 60 hours just to get everything synced up and to get all those pictures on, everything right. So the question I think you have to ask, is it worth the time? Because what you get at the end is a lovely hymn that maybe you can tape into the church at some point, but the choir members have not sung together and they're not singing in the liturgy. So this is one, if you want to make a go for it as a special occasion, and you want to do it just to have the experience of doing it, fine, but it really doesn't solve the problems of getting rid of this sadness that we have of not being able to sing together. Some chanters have been, or some people have been successful in wiring in chanters into the from home into the speaker system of the church. There was an instance of a chanter early on who had a new baby, and he just was not comfortable coming to church. And so I think he was a sound engineer, and the person at church was really sharp with electronics, and they worked out a system where he actually chanted the services during Holy Week from home, and people thought he was in the church. It was really very, very successful. Other choirs are like recording, or they have recordings of a couple of hymns, or some of their hymns, and so they take that hymn, and at the certain point of the service, somebody has it on YouTube on the laptop, and they hold that up to the microphone, so the congregation hears a choir singing, but the choir members really aren't. It's just a recording. So this one, you need some people with expertise around you to do it, and then I think the critical question is it worth it for what you're getting? Okay, so that brings us to the questions. I'm sure you have lots of questions, and how we're going to work this is that you write your questions into the box at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A, or the icon. And Barbara Minton is going to be monitoring those questions, and then she's going to ask me of them, and I'll try to answer them the best way that I can. Hi, Barbara.
Hi, everybody. Okay, here's a question. If you are alternating groups in a service after 30 minutes for safety, they need to be in different places. Otherwise, the second group is standing in the first group's aerosols.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah, you have to think about where they're going to be.
Two places.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't thinking of the choir big groups. I meant alternating by one Sunday you do it, and then the next Sunday you do it. But that's an interesting variation, though, that the whole choir is there. Yeah, you could work it out. There might be, depending on how many people are in church, you might be able to use the two sides, the two side portions, perhaps. I think that if you think about it, I bet you'd find a way. I hadn't thought about two choirs simultaneously alternating. I talked about chanters doing that because they're farther apart.
Okay, and there are many people asking about the recording. So I know in the announcement you said it would be recorded. They want to know, are you sending it to them, or where will they be able to find that recording?
It will be on the National Forum website. Depending on it, it's going to be a pretty big file. So we might send out a message to all of you. Well, no, we don't have all. We had 200 people. I don't, they don't send us. We'll have to see. I don't think we're going to get a nice list of all the emails of everybody who did it. Probably we'll just make an announcement on the church music list saying that it's on. But keep looking. It'll take a little while, maybe a week. We're not as we don't have as sophisticated a system as the Clergy-Laity had it out within an hour. If you want to hear the same basic presentation, but my presentation from Wednesday was almost the same, but I geared this more toward the actual singers of the church. You can look on the Clergy-Laity Congress website under the workshop ministries, and you'll see COVID and church music, and you could listen to a very similar presentation.
There are also a lot of people asking about the resources, either resources of some of the studies that you referred to, and also resource for the funky mask or the various kinds
Oh,
of
yeah,
masks.
yeah.
And
We'll,
so
yeah, go on,
is that
Barbara.
either something that you have ready to send out, or we could put together to send out later?
I have a resource list. And again, if you go to the Clergy-Laity site, you will be able to see that their system posts that resource list. But we'll most likely put that on our website too. And as soon as we get the information I've given you in this presentation, the website for that, the big snouty looking mask. But I haven't looked up we don't have the website for the frame that I told you about that really looks like an interesting solution. But we'll get that up for you too.
Okay, and then there's a question about the organ. The specific question says, how does the organ aerosol affect all?
Good question. I just, the minute you said organ,
Oh,
I
that's
thought,
from
wow.
Kathy Athanasoulis, so leave it to her to have the
Okay,
good question.
good, Kathy. Kathy, I have to look at that. That big there is on the resource list a wonderful document that I would recommend to you. I'm going to give you the best way to get it. It's produced by the American Choral Directors Association, ACDA. And what they did is once they saw all of the research coming out and all of the best practices, they put together this huge volume of what to do at every stage of church music. So they start with elementary school and they look at it three ways. What if you're in person? What if you're doing a hybrid lesson in school? Or what if you're all online? And for each one of those, they give you practical suggestions as to how to handle that. So they do that. They start with kindergarten, I think, and they go right up through middle school choirs and bands and orchestras and high school. Then they go on and they talk about college classes. They do the same thing, very thorough. Then they go even further and they talk about community choruses. And then the last chapter is worship. I think it's page 80. Go there, and that's where I got a lot of these suggestions too. When I didn't know what Orthodox churches were doing, I went there. Nicely, very, very nicely done. So I think it's acda.org is their website, but just put in the search ACDA or American Choral Directors Association, and it's their report of all the findings of the research. But I would highly recommend that you look at that. It's a great resource.
Okay, and there's a question asking if monitoring CO2 levels inside the church is a valid way to monitor adequacy of ventilation and air change.
Well, I'm going to have to, I should have said at the beginning, I'm not an air conditioning specialist either. I don't know. I really don't know. But I know that air conditioning systems, people that work with that understand how to regulate and how to measure the airflow. So you'd have to work with either your air conditioning company, or if you have somebody in your church who knows. I'm sorry, but I don't know.
And Father George, I'm going to mispronounce the name, Sahakis.
Oh yes, hi Father George.
He said that was a very thorough presentation, and he plans to share your professional looking slides with his choir and his chanters. And God bless you and our meetings that we'll be
Nice.
having this weekend.
You know, a lot of the priests who were present Wednesday said the same thing. Even the parish council people, they want the slides because they want to share it with their choir people. And I think that's a really good thing, is to, you know, choir directors, I would suggest approaching your priest right now and say, you know, we need to start thinking. I don't know when we're coming back, but we really need to start thinking about how we're going to do it. And I would, it's better to start, look what happened to the schools that didn't, you know, plan early enough to what to do this fall, and now they're like scrambling to figure out how to teach the kids. Don't let yourself get in that situation. Start from now, beginning to talk with your priest and parish council, at least lay out what you think the issues might be, and share this information with them too. But I think that would be a very helpful thing to do at this point, and start talking with your choir members. But you'll get wonderful ideas from them as to how to solve some of these problems.
Okay, and another question asks, says, won't choir aerosols spread out over the congregation if the choir is in the back, like over the narthex, projecting out into the nave? In other words, like a choir loft.
Yeah, that was one. I did read on the research that was a danger, that it would fall down on the people. Yeah, you have to sort of stand back. Just don't stand too close. Again, let me reiterate. That may be, the best thing you've got all planned means that you're in the choir loft and you think that may happen. That's only one dimension of higher risk. So you might, again, talking with your people and with your priest, say, well, we're going to take a chance on that one because we're being safer in all the other ways. Maybe we'll stand back a little, so we've got 6 feet from the edge of the choir loft in, so you're a little bit safer, knowing that of the decisions you made, that may be a little bit higher risk. It's going to happen. Nobody is going to be able in the beginning to have everything be in the safer risk area. Notice I don't say safe. I say in the safer area. So again, that's the adjustment each parish is going to have to make, because each of us have different things that we're going to be a little higher on than others.
Okay, and then somebody mentioned that you can search for mask bracket on Amazon to find the plastic
oh, good.
Frames.
Mask
and
yeah.
George's meeting has been pushed to 4:30, so he's still available. He can screen share the page.
Oh, good.
With the
site.
site.
Sent us.
If you'd like him to share that
yes.
right now.
Yeah, let's take a look. Here it is, see? See how nice that is? And then you put the cloth mask over that. And she said it's sort of, there's a cloth on the inside, so you don't have plastic on your face. And it just sort of fits on your face, and then the mask goes right over the top. And she said it's been a godsend for her. So you see the price there is $20. It used to be $40, but they see a market. And it's 10 pieces per pair. Oh, I think that's just the one. I don't think you get 10 masks. It's worth.
I think it's just the plastic insert. I don't think you get the mask.
Yes, the insert. Yeah.
So it's medicaldefense.com is what it looks like.
Mm-hmm. I think if you just say inner support frame, you'd probably get it. Yeah, okay. It's face mask support. Oh, medical support frame.com. No, medicalsupport.com. My friends here are copying it down. But I think you'll find it. Now you know what to look for.
Yeah, people are offering different ideas, but basically they're saying on Amazon that there are many sources. And
she said just go anywhere on Amazon or anywhere on the net, on the website, on the web. She said you'll find it in a lot of places.
Okay, and then going back to what we were talking about before, we have 2 choir members singing on opposite sides of the choir loft, standing 20 feet apart. The loft is in the back of the church, probably about 15 feet above the pews. They're not using masks. Do you feel that that's posing a risk to those standing downstairs, or do you think that distance is okay?
My feeling is it's better to be safe than sorry. And if you don't wear a mask, you're probably, because you're 20 feet away and you're that far away and up from the congregation, you're headed toward the safer, you're not in high risk. But if you can wear a mask, I think that it's so important right now. And if the frame works and that helps, why not? Then just better be safe than sorry.
And then somebody offered the idea that if you can post the slides only with no audio, it will reduce the size if they want to, for emailing purposes. So perhaps there can be two, one complete with audio
here's what I can do that easily. And you know what I think I'll do? Because I think most of you are on the church music list. And I'll send it out on the church music email list to everybody. That I can do very easily. To go through 200 separate emails and pull out the emails of all of them, I'm afraid I can't. But for those of you who are not on the church music email list and would like to be, just email me at pappas at indiana.edu. It's on the last slide if you saw it, and I'll be glad to put you on the list, and then I'll send everybody the print. You'll be able to print them out. That's probably going to be the easiest for you anyhow. Sure.
And I think you mentioned this, but somebody is saying, what about family members who are in the choir? Could they stand closer together?
Yep, absolutely. In fact, Nick Marigas, Dr. Nick Marigas in Rochester, Minnesota. Their whole choir is made up of family groups. So they've been able to sing together, and they're all talented musical families. So I think it's like 1 week Nick's family sings, or maybe they both come and sing, each family separates, but the family members can stay together. Just like in the pews, family members, family members means anybody living in the same household. So you're quarantined. I mean, you're all quarantined safe. But yeah, that's I should have mentioned that. That's another good solution if you're so lucky to have a family like that.
Okay, and somebody is asking if you have looked specifically at the study by John Reed at University of Bristol in the UK.
Oh, yeah.
Which indicates that singing does not spread the virus any more than just talking.
Yeah, he's one of those. I'm not calling him an outlier in terms of anything negative, but none of the other researchers are coming up with that same thing. None of the choral associations are coming up with the same thing. And the one, I'm not sure it was this man, but it's still a good example to make the point. He conducted a study that measured the aerosols from singers and said, you're way overblown. You don't have to worry about that. Well, as the other people began to review it, they said, well, it's okay, but he only tested one singer at a time. He did not test a whole group of people singing. So the questions began to be raised then. Does his findings really apply to everybody or just to solo singers? So I put them in that outlier category that I talked.
Vicki, do you know that you're frozen? Or is that just my computer? Okay, I think that you can see and hear me, and I think there was some technical problem with Vicky. So I don't know that I can answer the questions, but I can share with you while we're waiting. On Wednesday, Vicky did this presentation for the delegates of the Clergy-Laity, and it was very well received. She geared it a little more toward like parish council, clergy, and so forth, rather than singers. But a lot of the same questions came up. So that was very well received. So you may be hearing from your priests, from your parish council people, and they may be asking you for some suggestions. Okay, somebody who's at her house, Hope tells me that Vicky's trying to get back in, so she'll be back in a moment. Again, because so many people are asking, this presentation was recorded, is being recorded, and it will be put on the National Forum website. Tony Galarakis sent me a message and said that it can easily also be put on YouTube. A good suggestion was made that perhaps we do offer it slide and audio, the full presentation, and then offer slides only. If some people would like to do that or email it to various people, then it would be a smaller file. So those will all be available. But the National Forum Coordinating Committee is meeting this weekend, beginning tonight through Monday. So there probably will not be much opportunity for our technology gurus to get it together. So look for that next week, and I'm sure Vicki will send out an announcement saying that it's available. And I don't see that she's back in yet. So let me see if there are any other questions other than people telling me to fill some time. So if you have any questions or comments, you can still send them to me, and we can be ready for when Vicki comes back. So if anyone has any other questions. One of the things was that with the clergy, for the Clergy-Laity, the Archdiocese had a different program that we used. So when we had the waiting room for people to be able to be let into the session, we were allowed to have music playing. So we played Soso and Kyrie from the hymn series with the children singing and the instructional part. So there were a lot of questions about that. And there was a lot of inquiry about what that was and how they could get it. So that's something that through your Sunday schools and so forth, if you're not able to do youth music in church, that might be an instructional tool that your parish may want to use with the children.
Good,
and
good.
I think Vicki is back.
Yeah, light. Yeah, I'm back. Computer glitch. Sorry. Was there another question, Barbara?
Well, I was just trying to fill time, so
No, you did
kind
well.
of
Thank you.
of the things that we did that happened Wednesday with the Clergy-Laity, and I was explaining that in our waiting room we had the music from the hymn series being played, and there was a lot of questions. So I offered that that's something that all of the parishes may want to consider, since they can't do youth music programs face to face, that might be something that could be done.
Yeah, and they could
kids.
Yeah, and they could use it on Zoom because it's set up that Lucy, as the adult singer, sings the first phrase, and then she stops and waits for the kids to repeat it. And then she sings the next phrase, and then the kids repeat it. And then after she gets finished with the hymn, it's like, let's all sing it together. And then they sing it together. Now, again, they're not hearing each other, but they're all able to follow along. Yeah, so it's a good thing that you'd have to practice it, how you do it beforehand.
Yeah, if they
but
hear
you
the
could use it.
recording and they would be singing along with the
Yes,
recording.
yeah.
So-
The host or one of the people on Zoom would play the recording through screen share. Well, yeah, I'm sorry, that's not quite right, but you could work it.
Okay, and then going to, I think what we may have been talking about when the glitch happened, the study from Bristol. Somebody is saying that the study had 25 singers in the study. And again, they're asking you to provide the resources of what you used so that they could compare them.
That's on the resource list, yeah.
And then another person made a comment about that study saying regarding that's the study of singing versus talking, we do sing much louder than we talk, and
yes,
we're projecting.
That's right.
So it's really not, it's apples and oranges.
That's right. And see what's significant. I look at what are the professional organizations as a whole accepting, and I'm figuring if all those different professional organizations that have all the top choral leaders in the country, it's the national, it's like the American Medical Association, whatever they say, represents a broad set of people. All of these professional organizations are still, they're saying, well, those are interesting studies, but there's something, apples and oranges, or it hasn't been replicated, or it hasn't been peer reviewed yet. So they're accepting it might be something useful for us, but they're not accepting it. So that's and what I shared with you is the information that most of the professional organizations are still saying the same things. And it's been remarkably consistent, except for things like mental health and the masks protecting you. All of this stuff that I shared now was pretty much the same thing that they were sharing in the early days of the quarantine. They've refined it a little, like the refinements about the surfaces. They've just learned more, and they said, it's just not as dangerous as we originally thought. Yeah, there's some virus there, but normal cleaning and normal sanitation, you don't have to leave your groceries in the garage overnight because there might be some viruses on boxes that have sat on the shelf for 5 days. So it's how many people, it's the same way with the public health things. There are certain things that every public health person is saying, and then you get a study that says masks aren't necessary. Well, if all your public health people are saying masks and distancing are the most important weapons we have to protect us against the virus and get those numbers down, they're still all saying that. So they're not, these other, that's why I call them outliers. There are studies that are out there that you should watch, you should listen to, but the people that have the consensus of research are the public health people, or in my case about the choral singing suggestions, it's what the professional organizations are saying.
Okay, and just a little note from Nick Kairos. He noticed that before you gave your email address as pappas@indiana.edu, and now it's pappas@iu.edu. Both will work, right?
Both will work. That IU one is just because that's how I got this software. They created that. It's really only for software purchase, but both will come to me no matter which one you use. I'm still using indiana.edu.
Okay.
But I'll read them both. I'll get them both.
And Sophia has shared that their Sunday school, she didn't know if it would be helpful. She sent a website, www.cleared, CLEARED4.org/schools. And she thought that might be helpful to others. So, I could pass that on to you, and then maybe we
Mhm.
can,
For Sunday schools?
for Sunday schools.
Good. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. And now somebody's asking about recruitment, that because a lot of the choirs have a lot of older people, and even when we go back, this may affect how many of those people feel comfortable coming
Yep.
back. Recruitment is going to be
Hard.
more important than
Harder.
ever.
Yeah, and more important. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because just personally, I was using our Sunday bulletin all the time as a means for recruitment. So, you know, that was always the easy article to write for the Sunday bulletin. And all of a sudden we're quarantined. And I thought, well, this is not a good time to recruit. But yeah, absolutely. I actually should have put that in. That's a very good suggestion.
And well, and the person is asking if the National Forum has any suggestions or materials or anything
On
to
recruitment.
aid with recruitment.
Well, we can put that under our agenda. Yeah, yeah. We did. I'm going back to another question. One of the things that came out of the Clergy-Laity Congress workshop, someone asked us, is there any place that we can share any ideas we get for how to resolve some of these problems of distance and time and all that? And I had first suggested that Facebook page for quarantined choirs and chanters. But I'm thinking since then, I'm thinking the forum could start a page so that it really, you know, they're starting to put a lot of virtual choirs on and church services. You know, it's broadening in its scope. It was very helpful in the beginning, and it's still good. It's a good site now if you want to look up quarantined choirs and chanters. But I think maybe a separate page that just focuses on safe solutions or something like that, that we might take a look at and implement, and then we could all share these ideas of how we're solving the problems, perhaps.
And then
But
somebody
yes to
made
both of those.
the comment that we do have to remember that we're singing, but we're singing in a sacred place, you know, for a sacred purpose, and that I'm not sure what, you know, I guess you could make a lot of points with that, and I'm not sure specifically, you know, what point she wanted to make, but
Well, I was thinking
we
it
have to keep
related.
that in mind.
Yeah, I think I recall when I gave you the example of the chanter who used the steel rods and the plastic shower curtains around the analogion. I think that was probably behind the priest's concern about that. You know, it looked like a shower, and it just, you know, being that close to the altar, they just, yeah, I think, and then, yeah, we have to think of that all the time.
You know, and to be, you know, that we are singing prayers and to be prayerful. If we go back to singing, but we're doing it differently, I think at the beginning it's going to be odd, and, you know, maybe our focus will be on masks or distance or whatever, but, you know, we can overcome that and go back to being very prayerful. And
Yeah.
And perhaps the solution, you know, I'm thinking for my own choir, when we go back, we won't do a full liturgy at the beginning.
Neither will we. Yeah, I don't think we will either.
Ease into it. And if the first Sunday, if all we do is the cherubic hymn and that's it, you know, or something like that. But each choir, each parish has to make their own decision based on their people, and every geographic area, either your government or your metropolitan and your priest, they're going to kind of call the shots for you. And so
I'll speak with my choir. I think what Barbara just suggested is a really, as soon as we get the okay, and I think some people have gotten the okay to take those first steps, but I think that's what I'll do too. We had one of our choir members became chrismated, and we wanted to do something because we feel that we sort of brought him, you know, along in his journey into the faith. He was one of ours. And all we did is just at the very end of the service saying, God grant you many years. And the congregation clapped as like they missed us. We felt good because we sang. There was only, of the 10 or 12 that I can get, I think we had 6 or 5, maybe it was only 5 plus me. But we did it softly, and we felt so good, and that was it, and we had our masks on, and we always sing down in the pews, but we distanced, but people said they could hear us. And I think, everybody felt better, and the congregation welcomed us back. I think they're anxious too to hear us again. I think that's the way. Will be very, like, exactly as Barbara said, it'll be a little, you'll have to do a lot of thinking before the first time you do it, and talking with your people. But once it's over, it'll be like a weight lifted off your shoulders. We did it, and it was okay, and it worked. And then you just go from there. You still might just do one hymn for maybe 2 or 3 months, but at least you're there again, and then see what happens. But I really think that way, and the cutting large choirs into smaller groups are really the ways that my prediction is we're going to see a lot of people taking that route.
Okay, and Nick Hyris says, we're probably going to need 3 months of warm-ups after such a long break.
Oh yeah.
And I thought maybe this, maybe
Yeah.
this would be a good segue into your promoting Monday's workshop.
Okay, thank you, Barbara and Nick. Yeah, if you like this, although Mondays is very different, it won't be a lecture. But we looked at, my choir started complaining when we started practicing for this one little hymn we were doing. They said, I can't match the words and the sound. It's all of a sudden I've forgotten how to read music. My voice sounds real craggy. What are we going to do? We better start doing warm-ups and all that. So we got this idea, here's a good topic for the second workshop. And so what happened is, to make it quick and easy, we invited 10 vocal professionals to each, in 5 minutes, to give one tip about how to nurture your voice when we're in the midst of the pandemic. Okay, that was their challenge. And each of them some of them came up with similar things, because they're like, a lot of them are vocal coaches, vocal teachers. But they each are going to present a tip of what you can do at home, easily and fun, and what you should think about. All different. You'll be surprised at the different kinds of things. Not unusual, just things but the way they put it together. And they're going to demonstrate it to you, and we'll record that one too, so you can use it with your choir. So there'll be 10 different things that 10 different people thought. So that's at 3 o'clock on Monday. And you have to register through a different link that I think you have. If you got the link for this, you must have the link for the second one. And then once you register, you'll get the official link to get in. It's a safety process that Zoom puts in to protect us from any outsiders coming in. Yeah, join us. I think it's going to be fun. We hope, anyhow.
Okay, and you brought this up, but to reiterate again, to keep choirs connected and to socialize, they can meet in the church parking lot, perhaps with picnic chairs, and just sit in a circle and see each other and chat, and that it's a very uplifting, and because we miss each other. As well, you and George and I have been meeting almost every night for several days, and I said, when this is all over, I'm going to miss you guys, because we miss people. Yeah.
Well, remember, I think we all say choirs are our second family, and we've been separated from them, and so it really does help.
Okay, and I guess possibly to wrap up, because it looks like those are all the questions, but I didn't say each one individually, but many comments saying this was a terrific presentation. This was great, so helpful. Thank you, Vicki. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for all you do. many
Oh,
comments
nice.
like
Yeah.
that.
Well,
So
we're glad to, it's something that's why we're the National Forum of Church Musicians, to serve as a resource to all of you, to be your spokesperson. Many of the clergy are taking this forward. For the first time, we were one of the Clergy-Laity ministries presentations, so parish council people heard about this. And again, as I started, they're not thinking too much, in all the guidances that we get, other than, limiting the choirs, there's nothing being said yet about what to do when they're ready to go back. So we're going to have to take, not National Forum, we are going to have to take the initiative in each of your parishes to start the conversation. And don't get discouraged if, people don't understand, or they are just not ready to, no, we can't do that yet. Just keep talking about it, so when the okay comes, because I sense that, while the Metropolitans are pretty much together in their general guidelines, when it comes to specific situations, some are more protective than others, and they may be slower, or they're more protective of smaller churches. I don't know. They have differences a little bit there, so they're very careful what they're guiding their priests in different areas, even of their same metropolis. They have to say different things for different churches because of the situation. So don't get discouraged about that. But I think the talking about it, because the longer you start thinking about it, the ideas will come to you about, oh yeah, I could do this, or taking advantage of something in your parish that's happening. Well, I forgot to say this, Barbara and George. October 4th is National Church Music Sunday. Oh, good. I hope some of you now are starting, some of you who are directors and priests should be receiving this poster for this year, as well as a packet. And in other years where we said, here are 20 ways you can honor your church musicians on National Church Music Sunday, it dawned on me that we're not going to be there singing, except maybe the one chanter. So I revamped that sheet, and it says 20 things you can do during the pandemic to honor your church musicians. And I spoke a lot at the Clergy-Laity, almost begging them, please make sure, even though the church musicians aren't singing, please make sure to mention them in some way, to thank them for the work that they do, and to acknowledge that we're missed, and we're still here. We're not ever, we don't want people to think we've gone away and we'll never come back. But again, there's another thing I would suggest. When you go to church Sunday, talk with your priest about how are you going to celebrate Church Music Sunday. And there are some things, even just putting an announcement in the bulletin, even the priest saying something in his sermon, or saying something at the end, so that those musicians who are live streaming will know. So don't forget that date. We're still celebrating it, and we're hoping the parishes will still figure out some way to recognize their chanters, their church musicians, their youth choir director, their hymnology teachers, anybody who's a church musician in the parish, and clergy, of course.